Not the quiet kind of sleep you know today, with electric lights softly glowing behind curtains and the faint hum of machines in the background. No, this sleep is deeper, heavier. It belongs to a world without electricity, without late-night noise, without glowing screens. A medieval house at night feels almost like another universe. The air is cold. Stone walls hold the chill of the long night, and the wooden beams above creak softly every now and then, like the house itself is breathing slowly in the dark. Somewhere outside, far in the distance, an owl calls. Then silence again. Deep silence. Inside the manor, dozens of people sleep under the same roof. The lord and lady in their private chambers, their children tucked beneath thick wool blankets, guests, perhaps, resting in decorated rooms with carved wooden beds. But below them, far below them, in the quiet hierarchy of the house, sleep the servants. Their rooms are smaller, simpler, sometimes little more than narrow spaces beneath the stairs or along the back corridors. Their beds are rough wooden frames stuffed with straw. The blankets are thin, and the air down here is colder, much colder. For a few precious hours of the night, the servants rest. Not deeply, never deeply. Their sleep is always light, the kind of sleep that can break apart at the smallest sound, because morning comes early, very early, and long before the sun rises over the hills, someone must wake up. Tonight, that someone is Thomas. Thomas is young, maybe 16, old enough to work hard, young enough that his bones still ache from the long days. His straw mattress rustles slightly as he turns in his sleep. For a moment, he dreams. Something simple, warm sunlight in a field, the smell of bread. But the dream does not last. A faint sound reaches his ears. Footsteps, slow, heavy, someone walking down the corridor. Thomas opens his eyes. The darkness is thick around him, broken only by a faint orange glow slipping under the door. Firelight. He exhales quietly. Morning has come. Or rather, the work before morning. He sits up slowly, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. The room is cold enough that his breath fogs slightly in the air. Across the room, another servant groans softly and pulls his blanket tighter. But Thomas cannot stay. Not today, because today he is the first to wake. He swings his feet down to the stone floor. Cold, very cold. For a moment, he just sits there, letting the chill wake him fully. Then he stands. The small candle beside the door has already been lit by someone passing through earlier. Its flame flickers quietly. Thomas grabs his rough wool tunic and pulls it over his head. The fabric smells faintly of smoke and sweat. That is normal. Everything in this house smells a little like smoke, because fire is the heart of the household. Without it, the kitchen cannot cook, the rooms cannot warm, the water cannot boil. And right now, those fires are dying, which means someone must bring them back to life. Thomas opens the door and steps into the corridor. The hallway is dim. Stone walls on both sides swallow most of the candlelight, but he knows these halls well. Servants learn the house quickly. They have to. The corridor twists toward the back staircase that leads down to the kitchens. As he walks, Thomas hears the quiet sounds of the sleeping manor. A distant snore, the wind brushing against the shutters, and somewhere above, the soft shifting of someone turning in bed. The nobles are still asleep, but they will not remain that way forever. When they wake, the house must already be alive. The fires must be burning. Water must be heating. Bread must be baking. None of that happens by magic. It happens because servants like Thomas rise before the sun. He reaches the staircase and begins to descend. The steps are worn smooth from years, perhaps generations of footsteps. At the bottom, the smell reaches him first. Ash, cold ash, and faintly, yesterday's cooking. The kitchen lies ahead. It is the largest room in the lower level of the manor. During the day, it is loud, busy, filled with shouting cooks and clanging pots. But now, it is quiet, almost peaceful. The great hearth sits at the center of the far wall. Last night's fire has nearly died. Only a few dim red embers remain beneath a blanket of gray ash. Thomas walks toward it slowly. This is always the first task, the most important one. If the fire does not return, the entire household falls behind. He kneels beside the hearth and pushes the ashes aside carefully with an iron poker. A few sparks glow brighter. Still alive. Good. Very good. That means he will not need to start from nothing. He gathers a small bundle of dry twigs beside the hearth. These were prepared the night before. Thin pieces of wood, perfect for coaxing a fire back to life. He places them gently over the embers. Then he leans closer and blows, softly. Slow breath. The embers brighten. A faint crackle answers him. Thomas blows again. For a moment, nothing happens. Then, a tiny flame appears. Small, fragile, but real. Thomas smiles slightly. Fire has returned. He feeds it carefully. More twigs, then slightly thicker pieces of wood. Soon the flame begins to grow, licking upward between the sticks. The hearth starts to glow with new warmth. In another hour, this room will be alive with movement, but right now, it belongs only to him. He sits back on his heels for a moment, watching the flames dance. This quiet time is rare, precious. Most servants work from sunrise until nightfall without pause, but these early minutes, before the house wakes, feel almost peaceful. The crackling fire fills the silence. Outside, somewhere beyond the thick stone walls, the world is beginning to stir. A rooster crows in the distance, not loudly, just enough to remind the darkness that morning is coming. Thomas stands again. The fire is only the beginning. Water must be fetched, bread dough must be checked, and soon the cooks will arrive. When they do, the calm will disappear. Voices, orders, footsteps. The kitchen will roar like a small battlefield. But for now, the house remains suspended between night and morning, a quiet moment, balanced on the edge of a new day. And the servants, like Thomas, are already awake, working silently in the shadows, so that when the noble family finally opens their eyes, the world around them will already be warm, already alive, already ready. The fire grows slowly. At first, it is nothing more than a handful of quiet flames licking along the thin sticks of kindling. But in a medieval kitchen, even a small fire changes everything. Warmth begins to push back the cold. The air shifts. The room feels alive again. Thomas stands near the hearth for a moment, rubbing his hands together. The heat is still weak, but after the freezing corridor outside, it feels comforting. For a few breaths, he simply watches the flames. There is something calming about fire. The way it moves, the way it crackles softly, almost like it is whispering its own quiet language. But the moment doesn't last. Work waits. It always does. Thomas reaches for a heavy iron hook beside the hearth and pulls a thick log from the woodpile. The log is rough and splintered, and it smells of damp forest bark. He places it carefully on the growing flames. The fire answers with a louder crackle. Now it begins to feel real. Within minutes, the hearth will be hot enough to begin the day's cooking. Thomas wipes his hands on his tunic and looks around the kitchen. Even in the dim light, the room is enormous. Long wooden tables stretch across the floor. Hooks hang from the beams above. Iron pots rest against the walls. Every surface carries the quiet memory of yesterday's meals. Grease stains, flour dust, knife marks carved deep into the wood. This kitchen feeds dozens of people every day. The Lord's family, their guests, the guards, and the servants themselves. It is a machine of food and fire, and like any machine, it must start slowly each morning. Thomas walks toward the back door. Beside it stand two large wooden buckets. Empty. Of course they are. Water is never something a medieval household simply has waiting. Someone must go and fetch it. Always. Thomas lifts the buckets. They are light now, but they will not stay that way for long. He pushes open the back door, and the cold air of the early morning rushes in immediately. It bites against his face. Outside, the sky is still dark, not black anymore, but deep blue. The kind of blue that comes just before dawn. The courtyard is quiet. A thin mist hangs low across the ground. Somewhere nearby, a horse shifts inside the stable, its hooves scraping gently against the wooden floor. Thomas steps across the damp stones. The well sits near the center of the courtyard. It has been here longer than anyone in the house can remember. Stone walls circle its mouth. The rope is rough with age. He sets the buckets down and grabs the rope. The wooden handle creaks softly as he lowers the empty pail into the darkness below. For a moment, there is only the quiet sound of rope sliding against stone. Then, splash. The bucket hits water. Thomas pulls, slowly at first, then harder. Water is heavy, very heavy. The rope digs into his palms as he lifts the bucket up from the well. When it finally reaches the surface, the bucket is full, dark water reflecting the faint light of the early sky. He pours it carefully into one of the wooden buckets beside him, then lowers the rope again. Another splash, another pull. By the time both buckets are filled, his arms already ache slightly. Morning has not even begun, and already the work is real. Thomas lifts the buckets. Now they are heavy enough to stretch his shoulders. He carries them back toward the kitchen door. Inside, the fire has grown stronger. Orange light flickers across the walls. The room no longer feels frozen. Thomas sets the buckets near the hearth. Soon the cooks will heat this water for washing vegetables, cleaning dishes, and preparing food. Nothing in this house moves without water. He straightens his back slowly, and that is when he hears it. Footsteps. More footsteps. Not one pair, several. The other servants are waking. The kitchen door creaks open again, and a woman steps inside carrying a basket of flour sacks. Her name is Margaret. She is older than Thomas, maybe 30. In the world of servants, that already makes her experienced. She sees him standing near the hearth and nods once. "Good," she says quietly. "You started the fire." Thomas shrugs slightly. "Still small," he replies. Margaret walks closer, studying the flames. "They'll grow." She sets the basket on the table and begins tying back her sleeves. Within minutes, the quiet kitchen begins to fill with life. Another servant arrives carrying onions. A boy barely younger than Thomas drags a crate of carrots across the floor. Someone else brings fresh bread dough from the storage room. The peaceful silence of earlier fades away. Now there are voices, low conversations, the scrape of knives on wood, the steady rhythm of work beginning. Margaret kneads dough at the long table, her hands moving with practiced strength. "Bread first," she mutters. "It's always bread first." Thomas nods. Bread feeds everyone. Without bread, breakfast doesn't exist. He grabs a wooden bowl and begins mixing flour with water. The dough is sticky and cold at first, but slowly it thickens beneath his hands. Around him, the kitchen transforms. The fire roars louder. Pots are hung over the flames. Someone begins chopping herbs. The smell of smoke mixes with the scent of onions and raw dough. And above it all, the quiet urgency grows, because time is moving. Somewhere upstairs, the Noble family still sleeps peacefully. They have no reason to wake yet, but soon they will. And when they do, breakfast must be ready. The servants know this rhythm well. It has happened every day for years, perhaps centuries. The house wakes from the bottom upwards. First, the lowest servants, then the cooks, then the guards, and finally, the nobles themselves. Thomas places the kneaded dough onto a wooden tray. Margaret glances toward the small window near the horizon. A faint line of gray light now touches the horizon. Morning is arriving. Not fully, but close. Very close. She exhales slowly. "Move faster," she says. Not angrily, just as a fact. Everyone does. Knives move quicker. Hands work faster. The kitchen grows warmer, busier, louder. And outside, the first real bird begins to sing. A thin, fragile sound, but it carries across the quiet courtyard. Dawn is arriving. Inside the manor, the servants do not stop to admire it. They keep working, because by the time the lord of the house finally opens his eyes, the fire must be roaring, the bread must be baking, the water must be hot, and the house must look as though it woke naturally, as though everything simply happened. But of course, it didn't. It happened because of people like Thomas, people who rise in darkness, people who walk cold corridors before the sun exists, people whose work begins long before anyone else even stirs in bed. The fire crackles loudly behind him. The dough waits on the table, and the first true light of morning slowly creeps across the medieval sky. Another day has begun. For the nobles, it will begin gently. For the servants, it already has.
By the time the first pale light of morning begins to touch the sky, the kitchen is no longer quiet, not even close. The stillness of the early dawn has vanished, replaced by a slow but steady rhythm of movement. Fire crackles loudly inside the great hearth now. The flames have grown tall and confident, licking upward around the thick oak logs Thomas placed earlier. Warm orange light spreads across the wide stone walls, dancing along the wooden beams overhead. The room feels alive, not peaceful anymore, but alive. Thomas wipes a bit of flour from his hands and glances around the kitchen. Only an hour ago, this place felt empty, cold, silent. Now it is filling with people. Margaret stands near the long table, pressing her strong hands into a mound of dough. Each push folds the dough forward, then presses it flat again. Her movements are steady, almost hypnotic. Beside her, a young boy named Peter struggles to carry a heavy sack of flour across the room. The sack is almost as large as he is. He drags it slowly across the floor, the rough cloth scraping against the stone. "Careful," Margaret says without even looking up. "If you tear that sack, you'll be cleaning flour off the floor until noon." Peter nods quickly, breathing hard. "I won't," he mutters. Across the kitchen, another servant named William sharpens a large kitchen knife against a flat stone. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The sound echoes through the room with a quiet, deliberate rhythm. William is the butcher of the household kitchen, which means one thing: meat will soon appear. And when meat arrives, the kitchen becomes even busier. Thomas moves toward the wooden shelves near the wall. Several baskets sit there, filled with vegetables gathered from the estate gardens the previous afternoon. Carrots, leeks, turnips, cabbages. He grabs a basket and carries it to the preparation table. Soon the vegetables will be chopped, boiled, roasted, or thrown into the giant soup pot that feeds half the house every day. Nothing here is wasted, nothing. In a medieval kitchen, food is too valuable to treat carelessly. Even scraps find their way into broth. Even bones become flavor for tomorrow's soup. Margaret finally lifts the heavy mound of dough and cuts it into smaller pieces. "These will rise faster," she explains quietly, mostly to herself. Each piece becomes a round loaf, shaped quickly between her palms. One by one, she places them onto a wooden board dusted with flour. Within an hour, those loaves will sit inside the stone oven beside the hearth. Fresh bread, still warm, ready when the noble family wakes. The door to the kitchen opens suddenly. Cold air rushes in again. Two men step inside carrying a long wooden pole across their shoulders. Something heavy hangs from it, something large. Thomas immediately recognizes it: a deer. The animal has been cleaned but not yet fully prepared. Its legs hang stiffly, tied together with thick rope. William stops sharpening his knife. Finally, Worky understands. The two men lower the deer onto a large wooden table in the center of the room with a heavy thump. Margaret barely looks up. "Try not to bleed all over the bread," she says dryly. William smirks. No promises. Thomas watches as William rolls his shoulders once, then grabs the large knife he has just sharpened. This part of the kitchen's morning routine always feels different, quieter. More focused, William runs a hand along the deer's side, studying it. Then he begins. The knife slides smoothly through the meat with practiced ease. There is no hesitation, no wasted motion. He separates the animal carefully, dividing it into large sections that will later become roasting cuts, stew meat, and broth bones. Around him, the rest of the kitchen continues its rhythm. Vegetables are chopped, bread is shaped, water begins to heat in large iron pots. The air fills with new smells, fresh herbs, raw meat, smoke from the fire. And slowly, the scent of cooking food begins to rise. Thomas takes a handful of carrots and begins slicing them into thick chunks. His knife moves slower than William's, but steady enough. Across the table, Peter chops onions. His eyes water slightly. "That never gets easier," he mutters. Thomas chuckles softly. "You get used to it." Peter shakes his head. "I hope so." At the hearth, one of the cooks lifts the lid from a massive iron pot. Steam rises immediately, curling toward the ceiling. Water inside the pot has finally begun to boil. Perfect timing. Margaret gestures toward the chopped vegetables. In they go. Thomas scoops up a wooden bowl filled with carrots and cabbage and pours them into the boiling pot. The vegetables splash loudly. Steam bursts upward again, filling the air with warmth and moisture. Soon herbs follow, then bones from yesterday's meal. The soup pot never truly empties, it simply changes. Every day it becomes something slightly different, but it always feeds the household. Outside, morning continues to grow brighter. Light slowly creeps through the small window near the ceiling. But inside the kitchen, the firelight still dominates. The room glows orange and gold, and the work continues, faster now, because soon the nobles will wake. And when they do, they will expect breakfast. By now, the kitchen is fully awake. The quiet calm of dawn has disappeared completely. In its place, there is movement everywhere. The fire in the great hearth burns strong and bright, filling the room with warmth that slowly chases away the last traces of the cold night. The orange glow dances across the stone walls, flickering across the faces of the servants as they move from one task to another. Thomas can feel the heat on his cheeks now. A few hours ago, the room felt like a cave of stone and shadows. Now it feels like the beating heart of the house. Margaret lifts the wooden board filled with shaped loaves and carries it carefully toward the large stone oven built beside the hearth. The oven door is already hot. She opens it slowly and a wave of intense heat rolls outward into the kitchen. Thomas steps back slightly. Even from a distance, the warmth is powerful. Inside the oven, the fire from earlier has been pushed aside, leaving glowing stones that will bake the bread evenly. Margaret slides the loaves inside one by one. Each loaf is placed with quiet precision. Years of practice guide her hands. She closes the heavy oven door again. "Give it time," she murmurs. "Bread cannot be rushed." Across the kitchen, William continues his work with the deer. Large cuts of meat now rest on the table beside him. He wipes his knife once against a cloth and begins preparing one of the largest sections for roasting. A thick iron spit hangs above the hearth. This is where the finest cuts will cook. Not in the boiling pot, not in the stew, but slowly turning above the open flame. A boy named Samuel steps forward to help. He is younger than most of the servants, perhaps 14, but strong enough to turn the heavy spit when needed. William slides the meat carefully onto the iron rod. It takes effort. The cut is large. But finally it sits balanced above the fire. Samuel grabs the wooden handle at the end of the spit and begins the slow work of turning it, again and again. Slow rotation, always turning. If he stops, the meat will burn on one side. The smell begins almost immediately. Raw meat warming above the flame. Soon the scent will grow rich and heavy. The kind of smell that drifts through the halls of the manor and quietly reminds everyone that breakfast is coming. Thomas wipes his hands again and moves toward the soup pot. The vegetables inside are softening now. Steam rises in thick waves. He dips a wooden ladle into the broth and lifts it to his nose. Carrots, cabbage, onions, herbs. And the deep flavor of bone broth simmering slowly. It smells good, simple, but good. Margaret walks past him carrying a small basket of eggs gathered from the chickens outside. "Careful with those," she says as she sets them near the hearth. Eggs are delicate and valuable. They will be cooked quickly in small pans for the Lord's immediate breakfast. Not everyone in the household will eat eggs. Only the highest tables receive them regularly. Thomas watches as another cook cracks the eggs into a small iron pan. The pan sizzles the moment it touches the heat. Butter melts, the smell spreads instantly, rich, comforting. Hunger stirs quietly in the stomachs of the servants, though most of them pretend not to notice. Their own meal will come later, after the nobles have eaten, after the trays return. For now they cook, that is their purpose. Peter wipes sweat from his forehead and glances toward the small window high on the wall. The sky outside is brighter now. A pale golden light slowly spreads across the courtyard. Sunrise is close, very close, and that means something important. Soon someone from upstairs will come down, a steward. Or perhaps one of the chamber servants. They will ask the same question they ask every morning. Is breakfast ready? The kitchen must be ready for that moment. Margaret lifts the oven door slightly and checks the bread. The loaves have begun to rise beautifully, golden crust forming slowly. She nods with quiet approval. William glances toward the roasting meat. Fat drips slowly from the cut onto the fire below. Each drop hisses loudly. The smell grows richer, stronger. Thomas adds another piece of wood to the hearth. The flames surge higher, everything moves faster now. Bowls are arranged, plates are stacked, cloth napkins are folded, because when the first servant from the upper floor arrives, they will not wait. Breakfast trays must leave the kitchen quickly, and then another, like a quiet parade of food climbing the stairs. A moment later, footsteps echo faintly in the corridor outside. Peter hears them first. They're coming, he whispers. The kitchen does not panic, but the energy changes. Everyone moves just a little faster, just a little sharper. The door opens. A tall man steps inside wearing cleaner clothes than the kitchen servants. This is the steward, the man responsible for making sure the Lord's household runs smoothly. He glances around the room once. His eyes quickly take in everything. The roasting meat, the boiling soup, the baking bread, the prepared eggs. He nods once. Good, he says simply. The Lord will wake soon. Margaret gestures toward the prepared trays waiting on the side table. Fresh bread, eggs, small cuts of roasted meat, a bowl of fruit, everything arranged neatly. The steward inspects the trays briefly. Then he signals two servants waiting near the doorway. Take these upstairs. The servants lift the trays carefully. The smell of breakfast follows them as they leave the kitchen, up the stairs, into the quiet halls of the manor. Soon the lord and lady will wake. They will sit in warm rooms. They will eat fresh bread and hot food. They will begin their day comfortably. But down here in the great kitchen below the house, the work never really stops because the household is large. And breakfast is only the beginning. The fire continues to roar, the soup continues to simmer, and the servants keep moving through the warmth and smoke of the kitchen. Another morning has begun. And the great machine of the household is finally fully awake.
By the time breakfast trays begin traveling up the staircase, the rest of the house slowly begins to wake. Not suddenly, not all at once. A medieval manor wakes the way the morning sky brightens. Gradually. First the kitchen, then the corridors, then the private chambers above, and finally the grand halls where the Lord and his guests will spend their day. But for the servants, the morning has already been long. Thomas wipes his hands on his tunic as he watches the last breakfast tray disappear up the narrow stone staircase. The smell of warm bread and roasted meat follows the servants carrying it. For a moment, the kitchen becomes slightly quieter. Not silent, never silent, but calmer. Margaret stretches her back slowly. "Enjoy the quiet," she says. "It won't last." She is right. It never does. Breakfast for the nobles is only the first wave of the days. Work. Now the real labor begins. Thomas grabs 2 empty buckets from the wall again. Water. There is always more water to carry. Cooking needs water. Cleaning needs water. Laundry needs water. Even the nobles washing their hands before meals requires fresh water brought from the well. Nothing in this house flows automatically. Every drop arrives in someone's arms. He steps outside into the courtyard once more. The sun is finally rising above the distant trees. Soft golden light spreads across the damp stones beneath his feet. Birds have begun singing loudly now. The world outside the manor feels peaceful, fresh, almost beautiful. But Thomas does not stop to admire it. He walks straight toward the well. Lower the rope. Splash. Pull. The motion repeats again and again. Up, down, up, down. Water sloshes inside the wooden bucket as he lifts it from the darkness. The rope digs into his palms. By the time both buckets are full again, his shoulders already feel the weight of the day, and the morning is only beginning. Inside the manor, other servants have already started their own endless chores. In a narrow corridor near the great hall, a young servant girl named Anna kneels on the stone floor with a rough cloth in her hands. She dips the cloth into a wooden bowl of water, then scrubs. Slow circles across the floor. The stones are cold beneath her knees. But the hallway must shine, because this corridor leads to the Lord's dining hall. Guests will walk here today. Important guests. Anna scrubs harder. Dirt collects along the cloth. She wrings it out into the bowl, then starts again. Down the hall, another servant carries an armful of firewood toward the smaller fireplaces scattered throughout the manor. The Lord's chambers must remain warm, even when the kitchen fire burns brightly below. So wood moves through the house all day, from the woodpile outside to the fireplaces inside, carried in tired arms. Thomas returns with the water buckets, stepping carefully across the kitchen floor. He sets them beside the washing table. Margaret nods toward a pile of dirty bowls stacked high near the sink. Those, she says. Of course, the breakfast dishes. Noble families do not wash their own plates. Servants do. Thomas rolls up his sleeves and begins filling a large basin with warm water from the hearth pot. Soon the room fills with the sound of clinking dishes, bowls dipping into water, cloths scrubbing grease away. The work is repetitive, simple, but endless. Peter arrives carrying another tray of used plates from upstairs. More, he says with a tired grin. Thomas sighs. Of course. The pile grows, but slowly, it shrinks again. Clean dishes stack neatly along the wooden table, ready for the next meal. Because in a house this large, another meal is never far away. Beyond the kitchen, other parts of the manor buzz quietly with similar labor. In a small room near the back courtyard, 3 servants kneel beside wooden tubs filled with water and soap. Laundry day. Heavy tunics, tablecloths, bed linens. Everything must be washed by hand. One servant lifts a soaking cloth from the water and twists it hard between her hands. Water pours back into the tub. Her arms strain with effort. These fabrics are thick, and when wet, they weigh even more. Another servant scrubs stains against a rough wooden board. The motion is slow, but powerful. Back and forth. Bubbles slide across the cloth. This work will continue for hours. And when the washing is done, the drying begins. Clothes must be hung outside across long lines stretched between wooden posts. If rain comes unexpectedly, everything must be rushed back inside. Work on top of work. Meanwhile, the great hall of the manor waits quietly for the day's visitors. A tall servant named Robert walks slowly between the long tables, adjusting chairs and brushing dust from the wooden surfaces. This room will soon fill with voices. Nobles discussing land, guests arriving for meetings, perhaps traveling merchants stopping for conversation. But before that happens, the hall must look perfect. Servants move like quiet shadows through the space, fixing, cleaning, preparing. Their presence will barely be noticed once the nobles arrive. And yet, nothing in the manor functions without them. Thomas finally stacks the last clean bowl onto the table. His fingers wrinkle slightly from the warm water. He flexes them once, then looks toward Margaret. What next? He asks. Margaret smiles faintly. There is always something next. Plenty, she replies. And outside, the sun climbs higher over the medieval manor. Another long day of endless chores has truly begun. The morning continues to move forward, slowly for the nobles, but quickly, very quickly for the servants. Inside the manor, sunlight now pours through the tall windows of the great hall. Dust floats gently through the beams of light, drifting in the air like tiny golden specks. It almost looks peaceful. Almost. But the servants know better. Peace in a noble house rarely lasts long. Thomas finishes wiping the last of the breakfast bowls and places them carefully onto the wooden shelf beside the wall. His arms feel heavy already. Not painfully tired, just used. Used to working. He glances toward the doorway that leads deeper into the manor. Voices echo faintly from the upper floors now. The nobles are awake. You can always tell when that happens. Doors begin opening. Footsteps appear in the corridors. Servants move faster. And orders begin traveling down the staircases. Right on time, the kitchen door opens again. The steward steps inside. His face is calm, but his voice carries quiet authority. The Lord will receive guests today, says. Margaret nods. Of course he will. A lord always has guests. Traveling knights, landowners, merchants, messengers from distant towns. The manor is not just a home. It is the center of power for the land around it. And when guests arrive, the servants work even harder. The steward continues. The hall must be prepared. Robert, the tall servant who had been cleaning the great hall earlier, nods immediately and leaves the kitchen. Thomas grabs a cloth and follows him. The two men walk through a narrow stone corridor that slowly opens into the great hall. The room is enormous, much larger than the kitchen. Tall wooden beams stretch across the ceiling. Long tables run across the floor. Sunlight pours through high windows, warming the air slightly. Robert gestures toward the tables. Dust again, he says. Even though the tables were cleaned earlier, because in a manor, dust returns quickly. Thomas begins wiping the long wooden surfaces once more. Back and forth. Back and forth. The cloth slides across the polished wood. Robert adjusts the heavy chairs along the sides of the hall. Each chair must sit perfectly, straight, aligned with the table. Because nobles notice small details, sometimes more than servants wish they would. Soon other servants arrive, carrying fresh tablecloths. White linen, clean, pressed. They spread the cloths carefully across the long tables, smooth them flat, pull the edges straight. The room slowly transforms, from empty hall to place of gathering. Meanwhile, back in the kitchen, Margaret prepares small platters of food. Cheese, bread, roasted meat, fruit. These will be served to the guests who arrive before the main meal. Noble house. Visitors must always be fed. It is a sign of wealth, of hospitality, of power. Thomas finishes wiping the final table and steps back. For a moment, he looks around the hall. It is impressive, even after seeing it every day. The carved wooden walls, the banners hanging from the beams, the enormous fireplace at the far end. It is the kind of room meant to remind visitors of the Lord's status. Robert claps once. Good, he says. But the work is not finished. It never is. Soon the first guests begin arriving. Hoofbeats echo in the courtyard outside. Servants hurry to the entrance doors. Thomas watches as two riders step inside the hall. Their boots are dusty from travel. Their cloaks smell faintly of the road. Robert gestures toward the prepared table. Refreshments, he whispers. Thomas grabs a tray from a nearby servant and walks toward the guests. His steps are careful, balanced. Servants must move quietly in the presence of nobles. He sets the tray down gently. Bread, cheese, a small pitcher of drink. The guests nod without really looking at him. That is normal. Servants are part of the background of a noble house. Present, necessary, but rarely noticed. Thomas steps away again. More guests arrive. More trays appear. More footsteps cross the stone floors. The great hall fills slowly with conversation. Deep voices discussing land, trade, politics. And outside in the courtyard, life continues. Servants lead horses toward the stables. Others carry luggage from wagons. Another servant rushes past Thomas, carrying a stack of clean cups. Everywhere there is movement. Work layered upon work. Inside the kitchen, the soup pot continues to simmer, quietly. Bread cools on wooden racks. The roasted meat turns slowly above the fire, preparing for the next meal. Because soon, lunch will come. And after lunch, more cleaning, more carrying, more serving. For the nobles, the day flows from conversation to comfort, but for the servants, it flows from chore to chore, hour after hour, task after task. Thomas leans briefly against the stone wall near the hall entrance. Just for a second. Just long enough to rest his arms. From inside the hall, laughter rises suddenly from the table where the guests sit. A loud, carefree sound. Thomas hears it, then pushes himself away from the wall. Because there is still work waiting. Always work waiting. He straightens his tunic and walks back toward the kitchen corridor. Behind him, the great hall buzzes with noble voices. And bread drifts through the air. Another tray will soon need carrying. Another floor will need cleaning. Another fire will need feeding. And the day still has many hours left. For the servants of the manor, the chores are never truly finished. They simply continue, one task after another, until night finally arrives. From the outside, a great medieval manor often looks peaceful. Thick stone walls, tall windows, banners moving gently in the wind. To travelers passing along the road, the house might seem like a place of comfort and order. And in some ways, it is. The fires burn warm inside, food fills the tables, music sometimes echoes through the great hall during celebrations. But beneath that surface, there is another world quietly operating behind the walls. A world of rules, of ranks, of quiet discipline, because a house this large does not run on kindness alone. It runs on structure. Every servant inside the manor knows their place. Not just their job, their place. Who gives orders, who receives them, who speaks first, who remains silent. These things are understood, even without being written down. Thomas learned this very quickly when he first arrived at. He had been younger then. Perhaps 13. Still thin from the hard winter that had passed through his village. His father had brought him here, not out of cruelty, but necessity. A place in a noble household meant food, shelter, and work. Hard work, but work that kept a boy alive. On Thomas's first day inside the manor, the rules had become clear almost immediately. The first person he met was not the lord, not even one of the noble family. It was the steward, the same tall man who still moves through the halls each morning, checking the work. The steward had looked Thomas over carefully, studying him, as if measuring his usefulness. "You listen," the steward had said simply, "before you speak." Thomas nodded. "And you move quickly," the steward continued. "You do not make the lord wait." Another nod. The corridor. Follow the others. That was all. No long explanation, no welcoming speech. Just instructions. And from that moment forward, Thomas understood. Servants live inside a quiet ladder of authority. At the very top sits the lord of the manor. Below him, his family. Then the steward. Below the steward, the senior servants, the head cook, the stable master, the housekeeper. Each one responsible for a different part of the household. Below them come the ordinary servants, kitchen workers, hall servants, chamber cleaners, and finally, at the very bottom, the youngest workers. Boys like Thomas had once been. Children who carried wood, ran messages, fetched water. Every step of that ladder matters, because it decides who gives commands and who must obey. Inside the kitchen, Margaret stands high on that invisible ladder. Not the very top, but close enough. When she speaks, the younger servants listen. Not because she shouts, she rarely does, but because she knows the work. Years inside the manor have carved authority into her voice. If Margaret says the bread must bake longer, it bakes longer. If she says the soup needs more herbs, someone adds them. No one argues. Arguments do not belong in a noble kitchen. Across the courtyard, the stable master rules his own small kingdom. The stables smell of hay, leather, and horse sweat. A different world from the kitchen. Here, the horses are as important as the people. Travel, messages, trade, all depend on them. The stable master walks between the stalls like a quiet general inspecting his soldiers. "You," he says to a young servant brushing a horse's coat. You'll miss the mud under the legs. The boy nods quickly and works more carefully, because even small mistakes can bring sharp words, or worse. In the manor, discipline exists everywhere. Sometimes it is gentle, a warning, a correction. But sometimes it becomes harsher. A servant who breaks dishes repeatedly may lose their position in the kitchen. One who speaks rudely to a guest may be sent to harder work, carrying wood, cleaning stables, the kind of tasks that leave hands blistered and backs aching. Thomas has seen it happen. Once, a servant dropped a tray of wine cups in the great hall during a gathering of guests. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the entire room. The Lord did not shout. He simply looked at the steward, and the steward handled the matter quietly afterward. The servant spent the next 2 weeks hauling water from the well. Every day. No complaint, no argument, because rules in a noble household are rarely debated. They are followed. But not every rule feels cruel. Some simply exist to keep the enormous machine of the manor running smoothly. For example, servants never sit at the noble tables, even when the room is empty. Those tables belong to the Lord's family and their guests. The servants eat in the kitchen, later, after the nobles have finished. Another rule: servants move silently through the halls when nobles are nearby. No loud voices, no running footsteps. Because a noble house values calm and dignity. Even the way a servant carries a tray has its own quiet discipline. Straight back, steady hands, eyes lowered slightly. These habits become second nature after enough years. Thomas barely thinks about them anymore. Them. Like breathing. Like walking. Like rising before dawn. Outside the manor walls, life in the villages may feel freer in some ways. But inside these thick stone walls, life follows a carefully arranged order. An invisible web of authority and responsibility. And every servant knows exactly where they stand. Some accept that place quietly. Others dream of rising higher. But all of them understand one simple truth. Inside a great medieval household, rules shape every moment of the day. By midday, the manor moves with the steady rhythm of a place that knows its own rules. Servants pass each other in the corridors with quick nods. Trays travel from kitchen to hall. Doors open and close quietly. Every movement has its place in the order of the house. Thomas carries a small stack of wooden cups through one of the narrow hallways. Taut. Not too fast, not too slow. Servants learn early that the way they move says something about their discipline. A clumsy servant attracts attention, and attention is rarely good. At the end of the corridor, he steps aside as the steward approaches. The steward walks with long, measured steps, his hands folded neatly behind his back. He says nothing. He simply walks past. But even that silence carries authority. Thomas lowers his eyes slightly as the man passes, not in fear, but in respect. Or perhaps something very close to it. Inside the manor, the steward is the bridge between the noble family and the servants who keep the house running. The Lord gives commands, the steward makes sure they happen. Sometimes that means organizing the work, sometimes it means correcting mistakes, and sometimes it means delivering discipline. Later that afternoon, in the kitchen, Peter rushes across the floor carrying a tray of cups. He is moving too quickly, too carelessly. His foot slips slightly on the smooth stone. The tray tilts. One cup falls. It hits the floor with a sharp crack and splits into 2 pieces. The sound cuts through the kitchen instantly. Everyone pauses. Not dramatically, just for a moment. Margaret looks up from the bread she is slicing. Peter freezes. His face turns pale. Broken dishes are never welcome in a household where everything must be carried, cleaned, and reused again and again. Margaret walks over slowly. She looks at the broken cup on the floor, then at Peter. Next time, she says calmly, walk slower. Her voice is not angry, but it is firm. Peter nods quickly and begins picking up the pieces. No shouting, no punishment. Discipline inside the manor is nothing more than a quiet correction. Because mistakes happen. Everyone knows that. But there are other moments when the rules become stricter. Later in the afternoon, a young servant named Samuel forgets something important. He leaves a side door to the courtyard slightly open. It seems like a small thing, a simple oversight. But that door protects the house. Cold wind slips inside. And more importantly, animals sometimes wander into open spaces. The steward notices. Of course he does. He notices everything. He calls Samuel into the corridor beside the hall. The conversation is quiet. No one hears the exact words. But when Samuel returns, his shoulders look heavier. His task for the rest of the day becomes simple and exhausting. He carries firewood, load after load, from the woodpile outside, courtyard, into the house. It is not cruel work, but it is tiring work. A reminder. In a house built on order, small mistakes echo loudly. Thomas watches Samuel pass by with another bundle of logs. Their eyes meet briefly. Samuel shrugs slightly. A silent message. I should have remembered. Thomas understands. Everyone learns the rules eventually. Some lessons just arrive the hard way. As the afternoon continues, the manor grows quieter again. Many of the nobles have moved to private rooms for discussion. Others ride out across the estate lands. But the servants remain busy. They always do. In the laundry room, cloth still scrubs against wooden boards. In the stables, horses are brushed and fed. In the kitchen, new food preparations begin for the evening meal. Margaret stands near the hearth again, stirring a pot slowly. Thomas joins her, carrying another bucket of water. For a moment, the two stand quietly beside the fire. Strange house, Thomas says softly. Margaret raises an eyebrow. Oh? He gestures toward the corridor. So many rules. Margaret chuckles under her breath. That's why it works. Thomas thinks about that. She might be right. Without rules, a house this large would fall into chaos. Too many people, too many rooms, too many tasks. Structure holds it together. But still, sometimes Thomas wonders about life beyond the manor walls. Life in the open fields. Life where a man answers mostly to the seasons instead of a steward. The thought passes quickly, because another voice calls from the doorway. Thomas! He turns. Another tray waits to be carried. Another small task in a very long chain of work. He grabs the tray and walks toward the hall. Again. Behind him, the kitchen fire crackles softly. Ahead of him, the quiet corridors stretch deeper into the manor. Inside these thick stone walls, rules guide every step. Hierarchy shapes every conversation. Discipline keeps the great household moving like a well-built machine. And the servants, like Thomas, live their lives carefully inside that invisible structure. Not loudly, not proudly, but steadily. The afternoon sun hangs quietly above the manor fields. Its light touches the stone walls of the great house, warming the gray surface that has stood here for generations. Inside, the work of the servants continues as it always does. Footsteps in the corridors, the clatter of dishes in the kitchen, the soft brushing sounds from the stables. But even in a house where work never truly stops, small moments of rest begin to appear. Not long ones, just brief pauses. Tiny islands of quiet in a sea of chores. Near the back courtyard, Thomas finishes stacking a pile of chopped wood beside the kitchen door. The logs sit neatly now, one row upon another. He wipes the sweat from his forehead with the sleeve of his rough tunic. For a moment, no one calls his name. No one gives a new order. So he allows himself a short breath of stillness. The courtyard is peaceful at this hour. Wander across the ground, pecking at grains scattered earlier in the day. The wind carries the distant sound of sheep from the fields beyond the hill. Thomas sits on the edge of a wooden crate. Only for a moment. Servants rarely sit for long, but even a single minute can feel like a gift. A door creaks open behind him. Peter steps outside, stretching his arms high above his head. Finally, Peter mutters with a tired grin. Thomas glances at him. Margaret finished shouting at you? Peter laughs quietly. She didn't shout. He sits down beside Thomas on the crate. But she has a way of looking at you that feels worse. Both boys chuckle. Inside the manor, Margaret is known for her strict kitchen discipline, but she is also fair, and every servant knows that. Peter picks up a small pebble and tosses it across the courtyard. It skips once on the dirt before... Do you ever think about the village? Peter asks suddenly. Thomas shrugs. Sometimes. Peter leans back against the wall, staring toward the open sky above the courtyard. My brother still lives there, he says. He works with my father in the fields. Thomas listens quietly. Servants often come from nearby villages. Some arrive as children. Some are sent by their families to earn wages or learn a trade. Some simply need work. The manor becomes their world, their home, but the village always stays somewhere in their thoughts. Peter continues. He says the harvest looks good this year. Thomas smiles faintly. That means more bread. And better bread, Peter adds. For a few seconds, neither of them speaks. They simply sit in the warm sunlight, enjoying the quiet. Inside the manor, work continues as always. The moment feels slower, gentler. Soon, another servant joins them. Anna steps out of the kitchen door carrying a basket of laundry cloths. She stops when she sees the two boys sitting. Well, look at this, she says playfully. Two hardworking men doing absolutely nothing. Peter raises his hands dramatically. We are resting. Anna raises an eyebrow. I didn't realize rest was part of your job. Thomas chuckles. Anna sets the basket down beside the door. She wipes her hands on her apron. In the busy rhythm of the house, Anna spends most of her day between the laundry room and the kitchen. Scrubbing cloth, carrying water, hanging wet linens to dry. Hard work, but Anna carries it with a kind of quiet humor. She sits on the crate beside them, just for a moment. I give it 1 minute, she says. 1 minute before someone shouts for us again. Peter nods wisely, a generous estimate. They all laugh softly. These small laughs are precious. Inside the strict order of the manor, servants rarely have grand joys, but they find happiness in little things. A shared joke, a warm cup of soup, a few minutes in the sun. Anna glances toward the distant hill beyond the courtyard wall. She says, I thought life in a manor would be exciting. Peter grins. And now? Anna shrugs. It's mostly buckets. Thomas laughs quietly. Buckets and bread. Buckets, bread, and laundry, Anna adds. They sit together in comfortable silence again. The breeze moves gently through the courtyard. Somewhere nearby, a horse snorts softly in the stable. Then the inevitable moment arrives. A voice calls from inside the kitchen. Anna. She sighs. There it is. Peter stands. Your minute is over. Anna picks up the basket again. Back to the buckets. Before she goes inside, she turns and looks at the two boys. Enjoy your rest, she says. You probably have 10 seconds left. The door closes behind them. Peter and Thomas exchange a glance. 3 seconds later, Thomas. The voice echoes from inside the hall. Out, laughing. 10 seconds was generous. Thomas sighs dramatically and stands. Well, he says, brushing dust from his tunic. Back to work. He heads toward the kitchen door. But before stepping inside, he pauses briefly. The sunlight still warms the courtyard. The breeze still moves gently through the open air. Small moments like this are easy to miss, but for the servants of the manor, they are the quiet treasures of the day. Short, simple, and deeply appreciated. Thomas takes one last breath of fresh air. Then he disappears back into the busy world inside the manor walls. Inside the manor, the rhythm of work slowly begins again. Thomas steps back into the kitchen, where warmth and movement fill the room. The fire crackles under the large iron pot. Margaret stands near the hearth, stirring slowly with a long wooden spoon. Floats gently through the air. Thomas moves quietly to the side table, where wooden bowls are stacked. His task is simple. Clean them, dry them, stack them again. The work is not difficult, but it takes time and patience. Peter soon returns as well, carrying a small sack of barley from the storage room. He drops it carefully beside the table. Margaret says, "This is for the evening stew," he explains. Thomas nods. The two begin their quiet work. The kitchen is busy, but not rushed. At this hour of the afternoon, everything moves at a calmer pace. Outside, the sun has begun its slow journey toward the horizon. Golden light slips through the small window near the ceiling. Dust particles float softly in the beam of light. For a moment, the kitchen feels almost peaceful. Peter glances around the room and lowers his voice. "Do you remember the winter 2 years ago?" he asks. Thomas chuckles softly. The one where the river froze? Peter nods quickly. And Samuel slipped while carrying water. Thomas laughs quietly. Yes, the bucket went flying. Peter imitates the moment dramatically, lifting an imaginary bucket. And then splash. Even Thomas nearly drops the bowl he is holding as he laughs. These memories are small things, but they live brightly in the minds of the servants. Moments of humor inside long days of work. Margaret glances at them from the hearth. Her eyes narrow slightly, but after a second, she smiles. Just a little. She pretends not to hear their laughter, because even strict kitchens allow small moments of joy. Meanwhile, in the laundry room across the courtyard, Anna works beside a large wooden tub filled with water. Her hands move through wet cloth, scrubbing carefully. Beside her, an older servant named Martha hangs freshly washed linens across a long rope line. The white fabric sways gently in the breeze that enters through the open window. Martha has worked in the manor longer than almost anyone. Her hair has turned gray over the years. Her hands move slowly now, but they are steady. Anna glances at her. Martha, she asks, how long have you been here? Martha thinks for a moment. Oh, many years. She adjusts a sheet on the line. I arrived when the old lord still lived here. Anna's eyes widen. That long? Martha nods. The manor looked smaller then. Anna laughs. The manor is already huge. Martha smiles softly. Everything feels bigger when you are young. Anna continues scrubbing the cloth. Do you ever wish you left? She asks quietly. Martha pauses. She watches the linen moving slowly in the breeze. Gently. Sometimes. She turns back to the rope and clips another cloth in place. But this place is also home now. Anna thinks about that. For many servants, the manor becomes more than just a workplace. It becomes the place where their lives unfold, where friendships grow, where years quietly pass. Outside in the courtyard, Samuel continues carrying firewood from the woodpile. The steward's earlier punishment still keeps him busy. But now Thomas appears beside him. Need help? Thomas asks. Samuel looks surprised. You'll get in trouble. Thomas shrugs. Only if the steward sees. He lifts a bundle of logs. Samuel smiles gratefully. Together they carry the wood toward the kitchen door. The work becomes lighter when shared. Sometimes friendship inside the manor shows itself in small acts like this. A few extra hands, a quiet favor. Burden. By the time the sun begins to sink lower behind the distant trees, the courtyard glows with soft golden light. Shadows stretch across the ground. The long day of work slowly begins to soften. Servants move a little slower now. Voices grow quieter. Inside the kitchen, Margaret finally places the lid on the large pot of stew. That will do for now, she says calmly. Thomas and Peter exchange a glance. Peter whispers, Is that a break? Margaret hears him anyway. She turns with a small smile. 5 minutes. Peter gasps dramatically. A royal gift. Margaret shakes her head but laughs. Soon, several servants gather quietly near the courtyard wall. Someone brings a small piece of bread. Someone else passes around a wooden cup of watered ale. The group sits together in the fading sunlight. No grand celebration. Just tired people sharing a simple moment. Samuel leans against the wall, catching his breath. Anna sits nearby, stretching her sore arms. Peter tells another exaggerated story about slipping on ice during winter. Everyone laughs. Even Martha chuckles softly. For a few precious minutes, the strict structure of the manor fades slightly. The servants are not just workers here. They are friends, young and old, tired but together. Above them, birds cross the evening sky. The manor stands tall and silent behind them. And in these quiet, golden moments of rest, the hidden lives of the servants feel warm, human, and real. Soon the work will begin again. The evening meal must be served, the fires must be tended, the halls must be cleaned. But for now, the servants simply sit together, enjoying the rare and beautiful gift of stillness. As the sun sinks behind the distant hills, the great manor slowly changes its mood. The golden light of evening fades from the tall stone walls. Long shadows stretch across the courtyard. The air grows cooler. Inside the manor, candles begin to glow one by one along the hallways. Their soft flickering light replaces the brightness of the day. For the noble family, the evening is a time of quiet conversation and warm meals. But for the servants, the work of the day is not yet finished. In the kitchen, the large iron pot of stew rests above the glowing coals. Margaret lifts the heavy lid and stirs the thick mixture slowly. The smell of herbs, vegetables, and barley fills the room. Thomas stands beside the long wooden table, placing bowls in careful rows. Each bowl must be ready before the evening meal begins. Across the room, Peter slices thick pieces of bread from a round loaf. Crumbs scatter across the table as his knife moves through the crust. Outside the kitchen window, the sky darkens from gold to deep blue. Soon the stars will appear. Margaret finally nods with quiet satisfaction. "That will do," she says. "The stew is ready." Thomas and Peter lift the tray of bowls together. The tray is heavy, but they have carried heavier things many times before. Carefully, they walk down the narrow corridor toward the great hall. Their footsteps echo softly on the stone floor. The manor at night feels different, quieter, more mysterious. Shadows gather in the corners of the long hallways. The servants move through them like silent figures in a slow-moving dance. Inside the great hall, candles burn brightly along the long wooden table. The noble family has gathered for the evening meal. Their voices are calm and relaxed. The long day of duties and responsibilities is ending for them as well. Thomas and Peter place the bowls carefully in front of each seat. Neither of them speaks. Servants are expected to move quietly in the presence of their masters. Once the bowls are placed, they step back respectfully. A steward gives a small nod. That is the signal. Their task here is finished. Back in the kitchen, the evening work continues. Anna carries a basket of used cloths to the laundry room. The cloths are stained with soup and wine. They must be washed before morning. In the courtyard, Samuel walks slowly toward the large wooden gate. His task tonight is simple but important, closing the doors of the manor. The heavy gate creaks loudly as he pushes it shut. Wood presses against wood with a deep, hollow sound. Then he slides the thick iron bar into place. The manor is secure now. Beyond the walls, the countryside grows dark and quiet. Begin their nightly song in the fields. A cold breeze moves through the trees. Inside the kitchen, Thomas scrubs the last wooden bowl in a basin of warm water. The water has grown cloudy after hours of washing dishes. Peter dries the bowls with a rough cloth and stacks them neatly on the shelf. Their movements are slower now. The long day has left its mark on their tired arms and backs. Margaret begins cleaning the large cooking pot. It takes effort to lift it from the hearth. Ash and glowing coals remain beneath the iron grate. She grabs a small metal shovel and carefully spreads the coals apart. The fire must not burn all night. Too much heat could be dangerous. Thomas watches as the glowing red embers slowly fade. The warmth of the kitchen begins to soften. Soon the fire will sleep as well. Anna returns from the laundry room, wiping her wet hands on her apron. Asks. Peter stretches his arms with a groan. Almost. Margaret glances around the room. The tables are clean. The floor has been swept. The dishes are stacked. The fire is merely out. For the first time since early morning, the kitchen finally looks still. Margaret nods slowly. That will do for tonight. Those words feel like music to tired ears. One by one, the servants begin finishing their final tasks. Candles are blown out in empty rooms. Doors are checked and locked. Buckets are returned to their places. The manor slowly prepares for sleep. Upstairs, the noble family retires to their chambers. Servants walk quietly through the halls, carrying the last lamps of the night. The house grows darker, quieter, softer. Finally, Thomas steps outside into the courtyard. The night sky spreads above him like a deep, black ocean, filled with stars. The air is cool and calm. After a long day inside the stone walls, the open sky feels refreshing. Peter joins him, rubbing his tired shoulders. "Long day," he murmurs. Thomas nods. "But tomorrow will be the same." Peter chuckles softly. "That's true." For a moment, neither of them speaks. They simply stand there under the stars. Inside the manor, the last candle flickers. The great house that buzzed with activity all day now begins to rest. Soon, the servants will return to their small sleeping quarters. Wooden beds, thin blankets, simple rooms. But after a day like this, even the hardest bed can feel like a place of comfort. Thomas takes one last look at the quiet sky above the manor. Then he turns toward the door. Night has fully arrived, and the great household is finally ready to sleep. The servants' quarters are small and simple. Wooden bunks line the walls. A few blankets folded neatly at the foot of each bed. A single candle flickers in the corner, casting long, warm shadows across the rough stone floor. Thomas enters quietly, careful not to disturb anyone already asleep. Peter is lying on his bunk, eyes half closed. "Finally," he whispers, a tired smile on his face. Thomas nods, dropping his bundle of blankets onto the small chest at the side of his bed. The day has been long, sunrise to sunset. Every footstep measured, every tray balanced, every order obeyed. Even now his muscles ache, arms sore from carrying wood, back tired from bending over scrub buckets and tables, feet sore from walking stone floors all day. And yet, there is a quiet satisfaction, a sense that the day was complete, that work was done, for now. Outside, the wind rustles through the trees. Somewhere, a horse whinnies softly in the distant stables. The sound is familiar, comforting, a reminder that life continues beyond the stone walls. Thomas sits on the edge of his bunk, brushing his fingers over the worn wooden planks. He remembers the laughter in the courtyard earlier. Peter, Anna, and Samuel joking, sharing tiny moments of freedom amidst their labor. Those moments are treasures, small, fleeting, but entirely human. The other servants begin settling down. A hush falls across the room. Soft murmurs. The shifting of blankets. A door closes quietly in the distance. Even Margaret finally rests, her strict watch softened by fatigue. Her footsteps slow as she moves through the empty corridors, checking the last pots and pans. She nods to herself. Everything is in order. Thomas lies back on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. Through the day's events. The broken cup in the kitchen. The firewood stacked carefully. The subtle nod from the steward. The golden sunlight in the courtyard. Even the small teasing from Peter and Anna. Each memory feels heavy and light at the same time. Heavy from labor, light from quiet joy. He breathes slowly. The tension in his muscles eases. The quiet of the night wraps around him like a soft blanket. Outside, the stars glow brighter. The manor walls feel solid and protective. Safe. Even the creaking doors, the shadows along the corridors, they are familiar now. Part of the rhythm of life here. Part of the world the servants call home. Thomas closes his eyes. Sleep comes slowly at first. His thoughts linger on the day, on the tasks completed, on the friends who share the burden, on the quiet understanding of life behind these stone walls. Peter breathes softly beside him, a rhythmic pattern, almost like the pulse of the house itself. Soon, all the servants drift into their own dreams. The manor, too, seems to sleep. Candles guttering, fires dimmed, doors locked. The great halls now echo only with memories of footsteps, laughter, and whispers from earlier in the day. Night covers the stone walls completely. Cool air seeps through the small cracks in the windows and doors. The stars keep watch above. And for the servants of the manor, after a long day of unending tasks, endless chores, and careful obedience, sleep is a reward. Quiet, soft, well-earned. Tomorrow, the rhythm begins again. Sunrise will call the servants back to the stone floors, the heavy trays, the boiling pots, the careful cleaning, the endless service. But for now, for tonight, they sleep.